Hello and welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly Podcast. I am Javan, or as we learned in one of the previous episodes, Winklebot. And today I have with me Connor again. Connor?
Hey, Blood RS, Connor, back here to talk about some more fighting games.
Yeah, we're going to get a little bit deeper into the fighting games for all you people who like to hit buttons.
It's a disease. Don't get into it.
So specifically today, we're going to talk about 2D fighters and a couple of the subgenres within 2D fighters. And to start it all off, if you haven't listened to the previous episode, this is going to be part 2 in a multi-part series. So go back and find the previous episode that will give you the primer, all the knowledge of the lingo and things that we might reference in this episode. That being said, what is a 2D fighter?
So a 2D fighter is generally classified as a game where two characters fight, controlled by two people on a 2D plane. So there's no moving into the foreground or background. That's the basic outline of it.
So you can go up,
Everybody's
down,
seen it.
left, right.
Yep. You
Okay.
move up, down, left, right. And then how you move about in the air usually is what differentiates what the different subgenres of 2D fighters. This all started with Street Fighter 2 in 1992, where
Okay.
Capcom basically put together what a modern fighting game is, kind of invented the genre with that one. And so we'll start with the traditional 2D fighting games, which is what Street Fighter 2, Mortal Kombat, games like that. And how they're kind of categorized is you in the air have a jump where you cannot block. So once you commit to the jump, you can't block an opponent's attack until you hit the ground. There are some games later that will play with that, but that tends to be one of the main things that distinguish a traditional 2D fighter from something more flamboyant like an anime fighter.
Okay,
where
so like back to our previous episode that we did talk about all this. The core concept of a fighting game is this like network of choices that you have, and when you're in the air, you have basically no choices other than to land in a traditional 2D fighter. Is that correct?
well, you have one choice. Do I hit a button or not?
Okay.
So whenever you're in the air, you can, at any point in your jump arc, usually, with some stipulations, you can press an attack button and you'll have a jump version or a jump attack tied to that button.
Okay, so like
And
in-air input or something like that.
yeah, and their usefulness varies. Some are really stubby, used to hit people that are jumping at you. But like usually heavy buttons, so like heavy punch and heavy kick, using Street Fighter as an example, are used to jump in on the opponent because you have to block jumping moves standing. So generally, when you jump at somebody, your goal is to fall onto their head with an attack and then link a subsequent attack when you land in order to perform a combo.
And I should note that's important because again, I'm going to reference the previous episode quite a bit. You were stating that like if correct me if I'm wrong, but the general best defensive position is to be like a crouch block that
Yeah,
defends against the most options.
guard low, adjust high, because it's really easy, quote unquote, see when somebody jumps at you, right? And then you just hold back instead of down back. But if you watch some of like Ryu's light kicks, you're not reacting to that. They're like 7 frames in a lot of games. They're very fast.
Mm-hmm.
So you hold down back and adjust when you see a bigger move that generally indicates a high.
And so the jump is kind of important because it basically removes your opponent's ability to use the default defense of down back.
Right. It also, in the case of Street Fighter, which there's this whole triangle of moves like we talked about before, with pressure, there's kind of a similar concept with neutral in Street Fighter, where a jump will get you over a fireball, which is really important because characters like Ken, Chun-Li, Ryu, they can control, and Sagat especially, can control the screen a lot with fireballs. And you have 2 options, 3 options if you have a fireball. Do a fireball back and cancel out theirs. Block the fireball and take chip damage and concede more of the screen to them, or jump the fireball.
Okay.
And within that last option, there are again 2 more options. You can jump straight up, concede that you will not get any advantage from that move. You'll reset to the same spot, or jump forward, in which case you are aggressing towards your opponent and you step into the next part of the triangle, which is getting hit out of the air. So if you're familiar, if you've seen any Street Fighter, you've seen the big uppercut, the Shoryuken, the Dragon Punch,
Mm-hmm.
the 623 motion is what people call it. That hits people out of the air. So in neutral, you have throwing fireballs, which is beaten by jump, and you have uh, dragon punches, which beat jumps but lose to fireballs or neutral jumping.
Okay.
So from those kind of basic three interactions, that forms a lot of the core game plan for a lot of characters in Street Fighter 2 and further Street Fighters. It's a really fundamental part of that 2D fighting game experience, traditional 2D fighting game experience.
Okay. Um, what are some of the big names in 2D fighting nowadays that people can play?
Nowadays, well, Street Fighter 6 just launched this year, and obviously that's huge. Very good game. Can recommend. And I'm not usually a Street Fighter guy. Other than that, you have kind of the Western contender, which is Mortal Kombat.
Mm-hmm.
Mortal Kombat 1 actually releases, I think, September 19th of this year. And
Oh,
it's a reboot to the whole series. And it's got like tag elements with multiple characters. It's a wild looking game.
okay.
Um, and our third player tends to be SNK with the KOF series, King of Fighters.
Okay.
Um,
And
and KOF kind of has its own rules, but it still falls into that if you jump, you can't block. So I would consider it closer to a traditional fighting game, despite the fact it's very stylized, has a lot of mechanics, kind of like an anime fighting game.
okay, well, I mean that's a perfect segue into what is an anime fighting game. What separates that from the traditional 2D fighters?
Oh, these are where I live. So an anime fighting game tends to allow you to have multiple air actions and to be able sometimes to block in the air. So if you take Strive, for example,
Guilty Gear Strive.
Guilty Gear Strive, which I think launched 2 years ago, that's kind of the biggest anime fighting game right now. And how that works is if you jump and press dash or press the dash macro or press forward, you will dash in the air. You'll move forward in the air at a set trajectory. Um, and in Strive specifically, you can block in the air, but in older versions, you had to give up some sort of resource in order to be able to block, if you could at all.
Okay.
Um, so that's kind of the difference. Anime fighting games tend to also have like that anime aesthetic. They're very hyper stylized. They also tend to have a lot of mechanics. Like Strive is considered a pretty stripped down anime fighting game, and it's got 2 bars you have to watch, and I think 3 mechanics tied to each bar.
Wow. And then certain
Yeah,
characters have also other bars that fill up and stuff too, don't they?
yeah, yeah. They have other resources. For instance, you have Zato, who's an instance of a puppet character, which is not an archetype we talked about last time, where you have 2 characters on the screen and you control both. Well, if you hit the second character, his name's Eddie, he will go away until a bar fills up, and then he can be summoned again by Zato. Um, and then when he's out, the bar will continually decrease until it goes away again.
Okay.
And it keeps characters like that in check, because if you have 2 characters on the screen, you tend to be better than the guy with 1 character on
Because
the
they have
screen.
twice as many options to worry about,
Right.
generally speaking.
And they can also create really crazy situations that are hard to block, hard to see, things like that. Something that I know a lot of people like about more traditional 2D fighting games is there's not a lot of anime nonsense. So to go back to the Zato example, he will put Eddie on the other side of you, and you always have to block the direction Zato is, and then he will use Eddie's moves to force you to block and create gaps where he will go high low throw on you anywhere on the screen.
Okay.
And so depending on the skill of the Zato player and the setup, they can do really specific things to limit your options really heavily. Whereas in something like a Street Fighter, you don't see a lot of that type of gameplay. Pressure tends to be a little more straightforward and structured based around universal mechanics and not character uniqueness.
Okay. So what are some of the examples of anime fighters that have that aren't as quote unquote stripped down, that are a little bit more complex? I know
Um,
just from like my
the f-
surface like viewing of what you've played, um, it seems like, and actually I've played Skullgirls a little bit, but that one seems
oh, that's a good one.
pretty low
Skullgirls
bar
is
for
interesting.
mechanics. It doesn't seem like it's super
Um,
complex.
Honestly, it is.
Is it really? Okay, cause
Skullgirls is pretty complex.
okay.
But like a lot of the systems don't come into play that much. It does do a good job of leaving you to fight, right?
Hmm.
You have a super bar, you have a team, you have characters, you fight. Um, and then like the burst stuff is all, and the IPS system is all stuff that you can get into if you would like, but the game never forces you to do
What
that,
is an
unlike
IPS system?
like an Exert or a Strive. Infinite Protection System, I think is what it stands for.
Okay.
When Skullgirls first came out, there was an issue, quote unquote. I don't know if it was intentional or not, where you could basically be infinited from anywhere, anything. There was no way that the game could prevent you from looping the same combo over and over again, so long as it juggled correctly. So a lot of characters would just get touch of death,
So that's like our
which
to our way back in our previous episode, we were talking about combos, and during a combo, you can't do any input to get out of the combo,
usually, yeah,
usually. And
um,
so what you're saying is that
yeah.
basically you could, before the combo ends, input another combo and just effectively you call it juggling, where you're making somebody just float in the air and take damage infinitely until they're
Yeah,
dead.
and it's not even doing another combo. It's just continuing the same combo with repeated inputs. So you would
Okay.
just do like light heavy special, light heavy special, light heavy special, light heavy special, and that would repeat until the character died.
Right, because there's never
Which
enough
is
like recovery frames, right? Is that what it's called?
yep, yep, yeah. So they get put into hit stun for so long that your next attack is guaranteed to hit, which starts the sequence again,
Right.
basically, and they have no option to get away.
Okay.
And there's this quirk about fighting games where old fighting games had a lot of things like that. Um,
Okay.
Specifically, grander titles like Marvel vs. Capcom team-based fighters, things that were really hard to balance and didn't receive updates post pat or post launch. Um, are famous for having glitches and touches of death, just things that are generally not supposed to be fun to interact with. And there are certain communities within the fighting game community at large that love that. They adore it.
Hmm.
Two in particular. The first one's probably the weirdest. There is, I believe, a Super Nintendo Entertainment System Sailor Moon fighting game,
Okay.
and it is the most broken, imbalanced game I have ever seen. The grappler has a full screen dash and a frame one grab.
Okay.
So the grappler can be full screen from you and dash to you, and within one frame of that dash ending, grab you for half your health.
Wow. That's
It's loopable too,
damn.
and
So
she's not even the best character. There's a character that does more damage if you block her fireball than if you get hit by it.
what?
So if you block the fireball, you take more damage, and it's also again loopable.
Wow.
It's a nonsense game, but this whole idea of salt, getting angry. I don't know if you've talked about salty with your audience before.
No, we haven't, but we could touch on it a little bit.
Um, Getting angry at fighting games is part of the hype. People really lean into it. It creates good rivalries. Getting salty is generally seen as like a ooh
Yeah.
kind of that classroom feeling.
Kind of the BM even
This
if you will.
right the
Yeah.
VM. This community based around the Sailor Moon fighting game. That's what they celebrate. That's what they're there for.
Wow.
Is just these super unfair, terrible situations that they can put each other in, and their ability to just not crack and not get angry and not throw a fit because it's not fair.
Yeah,
It's
it's
insane.
complete BS the whole way through.
Yeah, it's a nonsense game. It's crazy. And then you have the in the same vein, the opposite end of that spectrum, which is a game called Hakuro no Ken, based on Fist of the North Star, which is like an anime fighting game, but there are problems with that game's gravity and combo damage proration system. So the more hits in a combo, the more damage you'll do. You can basically break the game so that you juggle dudes off the floor continuously, and you can run out of time before you kill people. So you hit them once, and the entire timer elapses, and they're
Wow.
still being comboed. But
That's
every character can do this, so it's balanced, quote
right. So to
unquote.
like to our listeners who might play something like Magic the Gathering, this is kind of synonymous with playing one of the eternal formats like Vintage or Legacy, where you make one wrong move and your opponent just casts their entire hand and you take 1,000 damage. It's
Yeah,
just it's and it's but it's every deck is sort of balanced around that, or there's mechanics in place that balance around it. Everyone has access to it, so
mhm.
inherently, if everybody's what they're bringing to the table is broken or busted, is anything really busted? It
Right.
kind of goes to
And
that
so
question.
that whole subculture focuses around that. Everybody has access to nonsense, and therefore nonsense is normalized.
Right.
And which is kind of the same energy as a game like Marvel vs. Capcom, which has a huge culture around that similar thing,
Hmm.
but tend not to be so overtly exploitative.
Okay.
Like, because Marvel vs. Capcom has a lot of a storied history. We could do a whole episode on it, of just like FGC culture built into it,
Hmm.
and a lot of it is around like because there are touch of deaths in that game, showing off new tech, saving it for the major, and then just blowing everybody out of the water because you can do this one frame link that nobody else knew existed and nobody else can do
Right.
until they all go home and they learn how to do it, and that's the new state of the game.
Right. That's really cool. Uh,
Yeah,
that evolving metagame that revolves around nukes essentially
yeah.
is really
There's
cool.
a channel kind of based around that called, I think it's Papa Lobster,
Okay.
and he does breakdowns of high level Marvel vs. Capcom 3 sets and talks about like how this set influenced the metagame at large. Like there's without getting too far into it, you can put your opponent's character into a juggle state that is they're not supposed to be able to get into, which allows you to do infinites.
Okay.
And it's really specific and really like hard to execute. And then one of the execution gods of the FGC just did it in tournament with a character that people didn't think you could do it with, was also one of the best characters in the game at the time. And that single match changed the entire meta because now every character had access to this thing. So characters who were garbage before are now suddenly really good because where before they struggled with damage or struggled with mix up, they only need one touch now.
Right. It just kind of solves the whole equation from the root.
About solves, it moves it all forward because there were like 4 or 5 other huge, like earth-shaking, meta-defining things that happened after that.
Wow.
And that game's been out since like 2011, 2012, and they're still like they played it for money at Evo, like
Yeah.
this year.
That's
It's
wild.
wild
That's
stuff.
wild to me. That's crazy. Um,
Yeah.
so one of the other ones I want to talk about that I've seen a little bit is it's called Melty Blood Type Lumina. Is that the name of the game?
Oh, Melty Blood. Yeah. So Melty Blood is a game based upon a visual novel
Okay.
about vampires, I believe. I'm not super well versed in Melty Blood lore, but it's made by a company called French Bread. It's a Japanese company who also make a fighting game called Under Night in Birth, which is about as anime as it gets and really difficult. Very very cool looking though. Um, and how Melty Blood works, it's kind of one of those. It's a legacy title,
Okay.
but the new version is so radically different from what legacy fans liked that there was a lot of fallout for it. I think Lumina's a lot of fun, but I can definitely see how people who were really well versed in the older games felt a little disappointed because the older game is really nuanced, and without getting super into details, each character is 3 characters and you can pick which version of that character you are at the character select screen. They're the same sprites, but their moves changes, their core mechanics change.
Wow.
So there's essentially 3 games that you can play at the same time against each other. It's nuts,
The
but
depth
it
of
has
knowledge
the
seems
hallmarks
like
of
would
anime
be.
fighting.
It seems like the depth of
What's that?
knowledge that you would need for that it would be immense.
Yeah, it's very dense. I mean, and it's like to play at the highest level at old Melty Blood, your execution had to be crazy, just on point.
Okay.
And so, and that's something you'll see a lot is like Street Fighter has its own, and Mortal Kombat have their own execution barriers, but I've never seen somebody optimize like an anime player. It's nuts.
Okay.
Like they will just grind situations and combos until the bar for entry of the game is so high it's almost unapproachable. Like there are people who have been playing old Guilty Gear for so long and are just so good at obtuse nonsense that it's impenetrable to even somebody like me. I'm just like, the buttons are cool. I like these characters. I could never compete at a high level against
Yep.
some of these people.
Yep. Well, that happens in a lot of different gaming communities where, like, especially with older games, like we'll say 10 years plus. I think of like StarCraft 1, for example, where
Yeah,
if you
that's a good
want to
point.
enter into the ladders in StarCraft 1, there's just so much time and effort that has to get put in to even begin to compete because of the
Right.
depth of knowledge that's already there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think fighting games kind of do that at light speed.
Yeah.
like
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We were talking about that last
the
episode.
difference in play, the difference in play between, because I bought Street Fighter 6 at launch and played day one for a bunch, played week one a bunch, and the difference in play, even now, which I think we're 3 months out, is a world of difference. Just people optimize so fast.
Hmm.
Like just the level of play is incredibly different across the board.
That's really interesting. The game itself kind of evolves. The meta, so to speak, evolves.
Oh, so rapidly, yeah.
Hmm.
And you get to watch it in real time. Like as there are these major tournaments and high level players start to like fight each other, you start to see these strategies really coalesce and crystallize for this patch.
Cool.
Uh, yeah. But
Um,
did you want me to go over any other anime fighting games? We've
yeah,
talked
yeah.
about
Give us
Melty
give
Blood
us a
and Guilty
rapid
Gear.
fire list of them, if you would.
Yeah, so you've got Blaze Blue, which is also by Arc System Arcs, same guys that make Guilty Gear. It's kind of their secondary game. Really cool. Check it out. Very complicated, very hard, but it uses sprites still, which is one of its draws. Central Fiction, which is the latest game, can be found for pretty cheap, especially on sale. Then there's God, it was on the tip of my tongue. Oh, Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. This one's
Okay.
weird
Okay.
because it's based on a gotcha game, right? A mobile game.
Okay.
It looks like an anime game, but it plays like a traditional 2D fighter.
Interesting. That's kind of
Yeah.
wild.
So I think you've seen me play it. I played Vasaraga in that. He's a dude with a big scythe. I
Honestly,
don't know if you caught me
I've
playing
seen
that.
so many
Yeah.
I've seen so many fight games at this point.
Fair. But you can't. It's got some core mechanics, and it's getting more with its newest release in Grand Blue Fantasy versus Rising. Hell of a title. Um, Getting more core mechanics, but you can't block in the air for the most part.
Mm.
Like jumps are committal. You're playing the fireball uppercut jump game in neutral. But I find that to be an interesting balance of 2D and 3D fighting games because I really like the or not 3D, 2D and anime. Yeah, anime and traditional 2D
Okay, there we
fighting
go.
games. Nailed it.
Yeah, nailed it.
And people were actually saying about Grand Blue that it was Street Fighter 6 when it came out because Street Fighter 5 kind of didn't do that well and had a pretty radical departure from what 4 was, which was the last really popular entry. And now Street Fighter 6 has a ton of core mechanics.
Okay. Well, yeah. Any other ones you want to give a shout out to quick?
um, Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2 is
That's
probably
a hell of a name.
uh that is a hell of a name. It's the Guilty Gear that came out before Strive. It's probably the hardest fighting game I've ever played, but when you beat somebody in that, you're like, damn, I earned that.
Okay.
I fought the game, I fought my character, and I fought that person, and I won.
Nice. Well, cool. I guess everybody stick around and keep your eyes open for the next drop because I think in the next episode we're probably going to cover 3D fighters and what that encompasses.
Favorite.
And yeah, I know Connor's super excited for a specific title in that. So Anyways, yeah, thanks for joining me, Connor, and thanks everybody for
Thanks for
listening.
having me.
And we'll see you in the next episode.